Hello and welcome to another installment of FIT Talks, the oral history program of the Fashion Institute of Technology, one of 64 campuses of the State University of New York. I'm James Ferguson, Special Collections Associate and Curator for the College Archives. We're coming to you today from the FIT campus on West 27th Street and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. It is September 5th, and the time is 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I have the privilege to be joined today by Associate Professor and Chairperson of FIT's Global Fashion Management Program in the School of Graduate Studies. Professor Ellsworth, welcome to the program and thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
Let's dig in. For context, would you please tell us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing?
To the extent that I can remember back that far, I grew up in the Boston suburbs and was, I think I can say, a little bit of a rebellious kid. This was the 1960s. I left high school when I turned 16 and finished at a quote-unquote alternative high school. Nan Golden, the photographer, was one of my classmates, which gives you some idea of just how alternative this high school was. And from there, I went on to fashion design school.
Excellent. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
As a child, I was pretty much obsessed with garments and textiles from a young age, and learned to sew for the most part from the women in my neighborhood. The path to what I wanted to be wasn't clear. I don't think it was necessarily clear for a lot of kids, particularly at that time. But the interest was certainly there. Fashion design as a career was not the rage that it is now, and it was really considered more of trade school. So to have great ambitions to be a fashion designer was not necessarily a fashionable or even had that much potential. But certainly I was always moving in that direction.
Right. Your family was supportive of that, or?
I think they didn't know quite what to make of it. My high school teachers certainly were not supportive. No, I can't remember having a lot of support, but I did know that was for me and that was going to be my next step. And no, it wasn't greeted with a lot of enthusiasm, let's say.
Right. What is your formal education and your informal education, for that matter?
The formal education was, I stayed in Boston to attend a fashion design school at the School of Fashion Design, which actually was founded the same year as FIT. Very small school. Boston is a city without in much of an apparel industry, and actually without a lot of style at all beyond plaid shirts and that type of thing. So although it lacked an industry, I can say I was well trained on the technical side, probably more so than the creative side. After School of Fashion Design, I moved to New York a few years later, worked in the industry, and also came to school at night here to FIT. And studied in the textile technology department, which is what it was before it was textile marketing management, or textile development and marketing, I should say. From there, and it was later in life, actually in adulthood, that I went to SUNY Cornell in Ithaca, and I studied apparel and textile management, finally graduating from global fashion management in 2007.
All right. And what was your first job ever?
Like a lot of people, I worked my way through high school waitressing and through fashion design school as a clerk at Brentano's bookstore in Boston when it existed. But my first fashion-related job was actually teaching those who were, at the time there was a big tobacco industry in Springfield, Massachusetts. I was living in Western Massachusetts at the time, and I was asked to teach sewing to those who were working in the tobacco fields. And I couldn't have been more delighted. They had a lot of trailers set up, or not a lot, they had a few trailers set up. There were not that many people. This was a federal grant, and the state of Massachusetts was putting some money into education for the farm workers. And it was a big deal. I worked with other instructors who were, for the most part, home sewers, and I was the one who went to fashion design school, so I was a big hit right away. I just remember it as being a pleasure. These are people that work extraordinarily hard, out in the fields, came in and learned how to sew, and I've never worked with a more enthusiastic group of people. I was also paid very well because it was, on a state budget. And
Right.
So, yeah, it was great. So that was really the first foray into the industry. And I was also working a retail job. That was the big year of Diane von Furstenberg, and I wore a Diane von Furstenberg dress to my interview, and so nothing could have gone badly after that.
Right. What other kinds of jobs have you had? I know there's been several.
I spent many years as a theatrical designer in New York and around the country, working in regional theater, opera, and dance, which included the Santa Fe Opera, New York City Ballet, many regional theaters, American Repertory Theater at Harvard, and really, again, I think it's really during my work in the theater that I developed an eye for design. It wasn't necessarily in design school, ironically. I worked with some terrific designers, not just costume, but of course set and lighting designers as well, and really learned the value of teamwork, which is essential in the theater. Mm-hmm. But that was 12 or 13 years was devoted to theater work. At some point after that, I worked in corporate textile manufacturing, in product development for the international market based out of North Carolina, and I was there for many years as well.
All right. And how, you've addressed this somewhat, but how did you decide on your career, whichever career you choose to address?
Well, the career was always going to be in some way working with apparel and textiles, so that much was clear. Mm-hmm. I think for many of us that road is circuitous and not often well defined. When I was in fashion design school, certainly the industry was not that interesting. It was a local and a national industry. And when it really became interesting was at the beginning of the trade contracts, the trade pacts, and which very sadly moved a lot of jobs, industry jobs here in New York and in the Northeast, out of the country to China and Southeast Asia. But it's also when this industry became very interesting. And that was about the time I had gone on to study at Cornell, and I studied with a very influential professor who was, her PhD was in economics, but she had worked with the Department of Commerce and was very enlightened about trade and how politics impacts the apparel industry. I would never forget those lessons, and it's remained my interest from that time on. So I continued to work, of course, on the political side when I went into corporate industry. I worked for Burlington Industries specifically, which no longer exists, at least in its former form. But it was, but they are lessons that I took with me here to FIT and try to impart some of that information, certainly, to our students, because it's seldom talked about.
Right. And how did you come to work for FIT?
Came to work for FIT when I enrolled in the Global Fashion Management program in, I believe it was 2005, and it was only the program's second cohort. And I was asked to step in as acting chair when I graduated from the program. And of course, by the time I graduated, I mean, it seems like a big leap, but actually I had, a good deal of industry experience at that point. And the program, I think I can say this publicly, really needed some help, as any program does when it's barely 2 years old.
Sure.
So that started my career at FIT.
All right. What experiences stand out most for you during your tenure here at FIT?
I guess foremost, I would say it was the ability to build a dynamic program from the ground up. And it's really been a remarkable journey here at the college partly because I received an enormous amount of support. We like the minutia here at FIT, there's no question about that, so I'm not here to say that it was easy sailing, but there was a great deal of interest at that point in building the School of Graduate Studies. And global fashion management, I think, was a particularly interesting component of this because it was and remains an international program, and we had colleagues from Paris and Hong Kong who were part of that contract with global fashion management. But a lot of work had to be done in finding the right faculty and building up the program, really brick by brick, and finding the talent among students that we needed as well. So that was, it was a great experience, but also a tough one that took a good deal of time. The experience that I think I'll miss most is working within such a creative environment and with highly talented people. And I know a lot of people say that when they're preparing to leave the college, that the community here is really extraordinary. And I'll miss that a great deal. But I'll also miss seeing our students leave our program and become leaders in industry. And there are people who came into our program from other parts of the world, even and those in the United States, who have moved on to executive positions in the 17 years that I've been with the program, and it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which person has had the most positive influence on your life, and what did they say or do to influence you?
I can't say that there's been just one person. I've been very fortunate to have had so many mentors. As a teenager, again, a bit of a rebellious teenager, but I'm amazed so many people stuck with me. I knew several young adults who were a few years older than I, but they were well educated, mentally well balanced, really had good judgment, and obviously a great deal of compassion. And I remember many of those people well, from the time I was in high school to my early years in college. And I would like to think that everyone has had that experience, but I know that that's not the case.
Yeah. What book or film or other work of art would you say has influenced you the most?
When there, I guess, have been a few times in my life and career, as again is true of so many, where there've been important segments. When I was a fashion design student, as I mentioned, I worked in the bookstore, and I worked with one of my colleagues was particularly influential. This was back in the 1970s, and I was encouraged to read Doris Lessing and contemporary writers like Thomas McGuane. Rather unusual for a fashion design student. But this was a period of time when those colleagues were very important. And I can still remember my tailoring teacher's disdain when I told her I could not finish a tailoring project because I had to finish a Hemingway book. I still regret that. And that colleague that I knew at Brentanos is now a successful playwright in New York. So that period of time for those books was very influential. And of course, we all move on from different periods of art and creativity that influence us. Mostly now, I read a great deal about international politics. And in terms of art, the art that I really love and appreciate are objects such as, of course, textiles, basketry, ceramics, and that's it. It's always a pleasure to seek out the new.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned playwright. Did you want to? Was that David Ives? Did you
Yes,
want to say something
yes.
more about him?
Only that it was David, but also other people at that time. When you worked in a bookstore, at back then in the 1970s, it was a serious endeavor. You were typically literarily minded, and it was you didn't want to make it your life's work necessarily, but it did attract some serious and intellectual people. So it was very much of a kind of a seesaw there. I would go from the bookstore over to the creative side where I worked as a fashion designer. Studied as a fashion designer, and it was a balance that I think I can say has been important throughout my life. Is cannot be entirely about the creative, but it really has to be, other things are very important as well, and it's a message that I try to get out to our students, that in order to be not just a creative person, but a person who's successful in our line of work, because the apparel industry is no longer just about apparel. It is sociological and political and business, and there's so many aspects to it. And if you don't understand those connections, you can survive, certainly, but you may not thrive. And that's certainly when I learned that lesson was way back in my late teens, early 20s.
All right. What are your future plans or dreams?
I still have some work to do there. I don't know what will be immediate. I would certainly like to move on to continue the work that I've started, the research I've started in looking at the history of the apparel industry in our city and in the eastern United States. There was a period in the 40s and 50s where New York worked very closely with Paris. It was a fascinating industry. It was the beginning of really mass production in the city. And that period of time is important, and our students seem to have, either undergraduates or graduates, no knowledge of it. And I think it's very important for our students to understand the context in which they work, but also the history of the people who have come long before them and worked in this industry as well. So I try to make our students aware of, for instance, the Triangle Fire Factory fire, and how important the union was at that time and remains. There's a lot to learn about why we're at this point today. So I would like to continue that work, not through writing, but also perhaps through video.
Nice, excellent. And what would you like most for people to remember about you?
I guess I would like people to know that I placed a great deal of value on the team, that no one in this institution or anywhere does anything without great teams, and I've had the great fortune of being one part of those teams. I would like to be remembered for creating both a high quality and unique program that I think I can say has worked very effectively with people throughout the world, and our international cohort are those people from throughout the world. We've also had great success working with students and our academic partners. In addition to Paris and Hong Kong, we've most recently partnered now with a terrific creative school in Mexico City. We had no Hispanic influence, and we're closing in on that now.
Excellent.
And I also hope that the program is and my part in it is remembered as being one that's dynamic and always changing. And those changes have not always been easy to make. Here we have a process at FIT, and a process that's very much in place where you really have to be out far ahead of it, and it takes a good deal of time. But if you have a good idea, as I mentioned before, it's no one will stand in your way, and it's possible to move ahead with that. But I do want the program and our team to be remembered as one with integrity and creativity, and also, as I alluded to before, in intellectual depth as well. And it's a lot to ask, but I'll be very happy if that can happen.
That's great. And finally, is there a question that I didn't ask that you wish I had?
I don't think there is. I think that's all I've got.
All right, that's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.